Welcome to the Think Christian podcast, where we talk about faith and pop culture, because there's no such thing as secular. Have you subscribed yet to the Think Christian podcast on YouTube? We'd be awfully grateful if you did. In exchange, we'll give you another show. Today, I catch up on all things One Piece, the manga series written and illustrated by Ichiro Oda that was first published in 1997. Then there came the anime series based on it that's been running since 1999. And now we have a new live-action Netflix adaptation. Claude Atcho knows much more about all of this than I do, so he's going to join me and Abby Olcese to talk pirates, strange powers, and snail phones. It's finally One Piece time for Claude Atcho. Claude asked me months ago if he could be part of our coverage of the new Netflix series for Think Christian, and so we're finally getting to that here. Claude, for those of you not watching us on YouTube, has shown up in a straw hat. He is committed. He's got the cosplay going. I'm also very pleased to have Abby Olcese, who, like myself, is a One Piece newbie. Abby is along for the ride too. Claude, you've got the hat. You need to get us started. Can you give us just the basic premise for this manga turned anime series turned live action Netflix show? Maybe tell us about your background with the franchise, and then along the way, please explain to me the snail phones.
Oh man. Okay. Yeah, so One Piece is the best-selling manga in Japan, and it's a big global phenomenon. It's been running for 20 plus years, follows the story of Monkey D. Luffy, who wants to be the king of the pirates. He wants to try to find this treasure called the One Piece, which you don't really know what it is, but if you find that, you're the king. And he wants to get out on the sea and adventure and find a crew, and he has big dreams, big aspirations. And so he goes out, and wild adventures ensue, including snail phones and marines and wild pirates and just a vast sort of zany and heartwarming sort of universe. My history with One Piece is I picked up the manga, I want to say maybe like 4 years ago, and read the first volume and thought, oh, this is neat. But I don't know if I'm going to stick with this, because one of the elements of One Piece is it's been running for 20 plus years. So there's over 1,000 episodes in the anime and over 100 volumes in a manga. So it's a big commitment. Wow. And that does scare a lot of people away, which is partly why the Netflix series is so wonderful, because it's an easier entry point for folks. So I did a slow entry and read the manga and watch the anime, and am delighted to see it on Netflix and delighted to talk about it with y'all.
Excellent. So the snail phones are literal for people who haven't watched it yet. It's like a giant snail on a desk that characters pick up and basically talk into to communicate. There are a lot of bizarre touches like that. Monkey D. Luffy also has powers because of a fruit that he has eaten that allow him to stretch like rubber. And so that's his key sort of power. Other characters have different powers as well. Abby, I believe you were more dutiful than me. And is it true you checked out some of the anime series as well? What did you see any of those? If so, what'd you make of them?
I watched the first couple of episodes just because I was kind of curious as to what we were getting into, and I wanted to kind of give myself a sense of what I was in for. And I'm glad I did, because I think it was a really good kind of tonal setup, telling me like what to expect, how crazy things were going to be, being really curious about how certain elements of the animated show would translate into live action. Like, for example, Monkey D. Luffy's ability to stretch wildly. Like, how is that going to look in live action? Is it going to be like off-putting? Is it going to be like endearing? I think the only things that kind of translated poorly for me were the snail phones. Okay. If only because they have like human lips and teeth, which I just find extremely creepy.
It's true.
Weird.
Yeah. It looks like essentially like Gary the Snail from SpongeBob, but like real and with human facial features.
Well, let's turn to this new live action adaptation, which has been, at least according to Netflix's numbers, this global sensation for the streaming service. Reviews, I think, have been kind overall as well. Claude, I imagine your expectations were high for this. Did the show meet them?
My expectations actually, Josh, were suspicious and low, partly because of what you mentioned, Abby, about how certain tonal elements would be translated. You know, when you're doing something in animation, you can exaggerate figures and it feels real, it feels cool. It can also feel both sort of wild, but also kind of grounded because it's animation. And I was just really nervous about how things would translate into live action. Like in particular, certain characters, like there's a sort of shark villain character who in the anime and in the manga is really large in stature. So think of, like a 7 foot, person. And then in the show's previews, this character is eye to eye with Luffy. So it was sort of like, oh man. And even I was texting with some friends that love the show and the manga. I was sort of like, man, this isn't going to work. So I came in with a lot of skepticism, and then I was just wildly surprised. And I think a lot of the spirit of the manga and the anime are captured through the skill of the actors, and not to mention CGI and all that sort of stuff. Like they had to wait until that was really developed to really put this into live action. But I think it's the actors, in particular, Luffy is just his spirit is captured so vibrantly that the show really worked for me. So I was pleasantly surprised.
I want to get to some of the actors and the characters in particular, because I think that's interesting. That makes sense. And I, not having any familiarity with the anime, yeah, I did have some of that adjusting I had to do in terms of the performances. So we need to get to that. But Abby, did you have suspicious and low expectations as well? Or what were you kind of thinking going in, and how did it work for you?
Yeah, I think mine were kind of low as well, just partly in quality expectations, just because I think we all remember when the live action Death Note came out and how that was not super well received, and also the Cowboy Bebop adaptation that came out a couple of years ago, which I thought worked well in places but didn't get a second season. And so my initial coming in was just like, this may not work, and even if it does, the things that they're going to have to do to make it work will be so expensive that this probably isn't going to get a second season. But again, I was really pleasantly surprised, and it did get renewed, and I'm delighted that it got renewed. I think even if you're not super familiar with the anime, which I'm not really. I've only watched a couple of episodes, but I think even if you're just coming in cold, it has such a wildly imaginative approach, and it's so warm and kind and fun that I think it's really easy to just kind of throw caution to the wind and get into. And I was really pleasantly surprised by how quickly I got into it.
Yeah, I think I had a similar experience. I definitely felt that tension between being live action and wanting to honor the anime. And there are technical ways you can do that, as you mentioned, Claude, with the CGI. This does have still that very smooth, I'm definitely associating it with Netflix fantasy productions. It's almost, some elements are nice and crisp, but really overall, especially the backgrounds, there's a smoothing going on. It's like there's a Netflix soft filter. and that's a little disappointing, especially for a show that depends so much on world building, right? But there are instances where the effects work well. You're so right about, I think you said tonal setup, Abby, and how if I had seen some of the anime, from what anime I have seen, I knew we would get some of these exaggerated elements, high emotions, right? And I don't know if the extreme close-ups this series relies on to capture that work quite as well, but I did like other aspects, like the use of split screens on occasion. I thought that was a nice touch. And I did get used to the loudness of the performances, eventually recognizing this is the volume level they're at in an anime. And so they're trying to honor that, keep that same tone. And I think as Luffy's crew bonded, I found myself bonding as well. So that brings us back to the performances you were talking about, Claude. I want to know from each of you, what character did they get right? You can probably speak to this the best, Claude, but I want to know what character you thought they got right. And was there a character you struggled with? I think you said before when we weren't recording, you're thinking about going as a character for Halloween from One Piece, Claude. So maybe that's the one you thought they got right, or was it somebody else?
Yeah, no, the character, I think the whole cast did a great job. The whole Straw Hat crew, I think. In particular, if I had to say the ones that are nailed, I think Luffy was really nailed. And I'm interested in talking about him as sort of like a a pure of heart, virtuous character. And I think how that sort of ties in for a kind of a theological angle. That's interesting. Zorro, sort of the stoic, kind of too cool for school character. And Nami also was really I think the spirit of her character was captured really well by that particular actress, Emily Rudd. So those are the three I think that really nailed it. I was interested in going to Halloween as Usopp, who is sort of like this goofy, kind of the goofy character of the bunch. But later in the manga, he has a persona called where he dresses up and pretends to be a superhero. So I was going to dress up like that.
Wow.
But my son won't think it's cool. So if he listens to this, I'm trying my best. Please admire your dad.
It's hard work, I know. How about you, Abby? Which character did you gravitate towards?
I think everybody really enjoys Luffy. I like Luffy a lot. I thought that the transition from the anime to live action it felt almost seamless, just in terms of the amount of confidence that he has and the amount of energy that he has, and how you fall in love with that character almost immediately because he's just so charming and so dedicated and excited. I also really liked Kobe, which is another, I thought, pretty good transition from anime to live action, and just the dynamic between Kobe and Luffy, because these are characters like Luffy essentially rescues Kobe from pirate slavery in the first episode. Kobe's dream is to become a Marine, and the Marines are the enemies of the pirates. And so that should be, that should be a problem, but it's not for Luffy, because he wants everybody to achieve their dreams so much that he unequivocally supports Kobe in his dream. And I think we see Kobe kind of figuring out the balance between what he wants to do and being a good friend throughout the series. And I really kind of gravitated toward that arc for him.
Yeah, that supporting, affirming element to Luffy's character is so crucial, and it's right there from the start. It took me a little while longer to come around on him than you, Abby. And, I think Iñaki Godoy is the actor playing Luffy, we should say. He's very insistent, and it takes a while to realize, the goodness of that quality and what's behind his insistence and what he's being insistent about. And I think once that does come forward, I did gravitate more towards the character. And he's crucial to, we've talked about this, forget what you said at the top, Claude, but a generous, or, for a pirate show, it's a different sort of attitude that is brought to this series. And I think Luffy is the key to that. So I want to get to what you were talking about, Claude, when you describe Luffy as pure of heart, how you see that working.
Well, I think part of this is sort of a staple of anime or shonen manga, which is sort of like teenage, manga targeted towards teenagers. And there's usually a character at the center, protagonist, who has a dream and is, devoted to that dream, but at the same time is a virtuous person. And so I think with Luffy, you find, just as we're sort of mentioning, he has this dream. He wants to become the king of the pirates. It's the dream against all odds, but he believes in himself deeply. He has people that come around him, and even though his dream is wild, they support him. The character Shanks, who's sort of a legendary pirate who takes Luffy under his wing. And so Luffy has this dream that he's going to give him his whole self to, even if it ends up kind of harming him, he's gonna go for this dream. But at the same time, as he encounters people, he respects their dream as well. So he has his dream, but he honors the dreams of others, and he believes in them when they don't believe in themselves. So the sort of purity of heart, this virtuous dynamic where he wants to be a pirate, but a different type of pirate, right? He's going to be a pirate who stands up for his friends. He's going to be a pirate who protects the weak. He's going to be a pirate who stands up for the vulnerable. He is the sort of purest form of somebody who wants adventure and wants to explore and wants to test their strength and do all of these things. So, to me, and I think the other element that's interesting in the show is it's, reminiscent of sort of gospel accounts, right? Here's a person with this call on their life, and they recruit others to come and to join their band. And now they're going to go out on this, wild adventure and mission. So I actually ran into someone while the show was airing and came up that I'm a pastor, and they're like, "Oh, do you watch The Chosen?" And I was like, "No, I haven't." But in my mind, I was like, "But I've been watching One Piece, which is reminding me of what it's like to call disciples and to follow and to roll with a magnetic person and to say, oh my goodness, at first I thought this person was wild and kind of just really out there. But the purity of their heart, their convictions are there's so much virtue and there's so much magnetism that, you know what, I am going to kind of follow them and let's see where this thing goes. So I think Luffy really embodies that. I think that comes through in the show. And I think that's why, I watch with my wife who, has always been kind of skeptical of the anime and the manga. And she was locked in, it took at least 1 or 2 episodes, but was locked in. And I think it's because of that virtuous character that Luffy has.
Ever since I was a kid, Shanks would tell me stories about pirates and their adventures. So yeah, the sea's been calling. Well, not exactly calling because I pretty much can't swim. But you get the idea. I'm setting out to follow my dream. To find the One Piece. And become King of the Pirates!
Nice. Yeah, absolutely. It makes him countercultural within this world, right? And I had a similar thought about Luffy, but really the entire crew being, in a way, mirroring how Christians are called to be countercultural and stand apart in ways. You touched on a couple of things, Claude, but even in relation to violence. Now, Luffy, uses those powers to fight, absolutely, but only when pushed to a certain point, and certainly in contrast with a lot of the other pirate characters who we meet. And even the Marines, right? The Marines employ violence instinctively. I think though treasure is involved, it is the goal. You don't get the sense that Luffy is driven by greed, and he brings the other members of the crew alongside that. Loyalty to those friends takes precedence. And as we've said, encouraging them in their talents and their dreams, that seems to take priority. And there's also this idea of the community that is being formed here among them. This life together he's encouraging over something like individuality. I think that's, a key distinction of Christian counterculture as well. And one way this popped up to me visually is the use of the wanted posters throughout. I really enjoyed that, where we would get this before we were introduced to a new pirate. We'd see their wanted poster and how much the bounty is on their heads. And this is for the vicious pirates, right? But by the season's end, Luffy finally earns his own wanted poster, and it has come to mean something different when we see that on the screen, right? It's almost at this point a visual badge of honor, not shame. So, but this does get complicated. So maybe, Abby, I'll ask you this distinction and see what you made of this. But, the series does open with the execution of an infamous pirate, Gold Roger, played by Michael Dorman. And in the scene, we see him proclaim just before he is killed, wealth, fame, power. I found everything this world has to offer. And, Luffy is inspired by Gold Roger. And you see that he is after some of those things, but maybe from a different angle, maybe wealth, it's not the main priority, but he is after fame. That is one that seems to stick through. And so you mentioned, Claude, at the top, how he wants to be king of the pirates. I don't know in season 2 how that's going to play in terms of this virtuous persona, if he's going to be a different kind of king if he gets to that point. But did you sense any tension here, Abby, between this virtuous character that we see in Luffy is definitely there, but also some of these traditional pirate goals he's still after?
I think there is some tension. I think if you were to talk to Luffy about that, I think his answer would be very different. He seems to have a very almost like initially positive impression of almost everybody he meets. So
very true.
Yeah, I think that his interest in that, at least from what we see in the show, that Shanks has a big part to play in that. That the fact that he is so heavily influenced by somebody who was good to him and who taught him from a very young age to not be violent, to not be selfish, to stand up for other people, but only when you're standing up for other people and not necessarily when you're standing up for like your own pride or your own legacy. So I think that's really strongly influenced the person that he wants to be. And I think that's probably a big reason behind why he wants to be king of the pirates. In addition to like the adventure and the romance of it all, which I think is a large part of it. He's a pretty young kid, and I can see how that would be really appealing. But I did wonder throughout, and like this may have already been answered. I mean, it probably already has been answered in like the anime and the manga. So Claude, no spoilers. But when Gold Roger says that he's found wealth and fame and power, and he's found all the world has to offer, he says that he's offering his treasure to everybody, but he doesn't say what that treasure is. And I suspect that maybe that treasure is not the material wealth that a lot of the other pirates think it's going to be. I feel like that would be pretty much in keeping with the attitude that we've seen so far, that maybe wealth, power, and fame, those are things that you can get, those are things that you can encounter and go after, but they may not be that fulfilling. And maybe, the real satisfaction is the friends you make along the way.
There's definitely some mystery around the One Piece that you can detect all throughout this season. And I do think, Abby, to your point, it's notable that unless I'm wrong, the season finale does flash back to Gold Roger in that moment and kind of remind us, right, of the claim he made. So, Claude, I don't know if you're slightly smiling, trying to keep down information that from the manga or the anime of what Abby and I are wondering about, but maybe without spoiling it, can you touch on, this sort of tension in this direction in terms of the King of the Pirates and Luffy's character?
Well, I think you can see it a little bit at these different moments just in this first season. So, when a few episodes in, a pirate needs not just a crew, but also a ship. And so they find their way into a ship, the Mary. And, if you want to, Luffy's always happy, pretty much, unless you're messing with his friends. Then he gets angry. But, one of the happiest moments for him in the first season is him sitting on the top of the Mary, sitting on top of the ship and just sort of like taking in the wind and the waves. And I think it's a picture of sort of like, here's part of his treasure. Like he's really in the process of being a pirate. He has friends. They're going on this adventure. They're going to go to what's called the Grand Line, right? Out into this dangerous part of the sea to go explore. And he's, like a kid in a candy shop. And so I think it's not just the end, right? But also the process and the journey that matters tremendously. So I think this is a good tension to actually pick up on. And I think you see these spots, even just in this first season, where the joy is in this journey that he's sharing with others.
Yeah, the treasure is almost an excuse. The pursuit of the treasure is an excuse for the community, the forming of the community.
Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, is there anything else either of you wanted to touch on? I don't know if there was an element, Claude, that we left out, but through your eyes is important to talk about, or Abby, anything else you wanted to jump in on?
I think it's, from the discipleship standpoint, I think it's really interesting to consider the kinds of people that Luffy brings around him. And I feel like there's kind of, there is kind of a Christ-like sense of who he chooses to bring along with him. And at first, like, we have characters like Roanoa Zoro, who's like super cool and wants to be the world's best swordsman, and Nami, whose past is kind of shady a little bit. You have Usopp, who is extremely eager but lacks like real world experience, and then Sanji, who we meet later, who he's kind of a hard person to pin down at this point, I think, but he's very dedicated, I think, to the idea of this new crew and this new family, but has, I think, his own ambitions that he's also trying to follow. But not all of these characters, I think, would appear to be like people that you'd want to be friends with. Like right off the bat, they're either annoying or shady or self-interested, but Luffy sees through that like immediately and seems to see something in them that they don't see in themselves, and is also really forgiving when, like, there's one of the characters, Nami, ends up kind of perpetrating a fairly big betrayal toward the end of the first season. And we find out the reasons for that later on. But when everybody else has thoughts about why that happened, like Sanji thinks she's been basically kind of press ganged into working against them, Zoro is pretty sure that she's doing exactly what she wants to and needs to be left alone. And Luffy is pretty much the only character who immediately stands up for her and says, no, she is who she says she is. I realize that there's more to this. I forgive her immediately. We need to go help our friend. And like, your friends don't stop being friends even when they do things that in other circumstances would make you not want to be their friend anymore. But that to me seems like a very consistent view of community and discipleship in a way that you don't always, I think, see that immediately expressed in a lot of mainstream media. And I found that kind of sweet and refreshing.
Are those his keys? Oh, how'd you do that?
I'm a thief.
You know, you're really good at thieving.
And a good talker, too. You should think about joining my pirate crew. Let's get one thing straight. I am never joining anything with you. I hate pirates. Hate them.
That's because you don't know me yet.
Yeah, Definitely. Yeah, and to your point about, calling each of them, it's true there is a quality that makes Luffy notice each of them, but then alongside that comes, maybe 3 or 4 other qualities that would definitely be in the negative category. So it's not as if, he discovers just this wonderful power they have that he can use to his own ends. It's like, oh, that's interesting, and I'm going to overlook for now these other elements that aren't so great and invite them in to be part of this forming community. So I like how each interaction has a little bit of that. Any final words, Claude?
I would just say I think it's interesting, we're thinking of different kind of angles or things that are fascinating. I think the hat, the straw hat that Luffy has, and the way that that's used throughout the show, there's a really significant emotional moment of redemption where Luffy places his hat on a person. The person has said like, Luffy, help me. And it's sort of, it really is thematically like it's very clear sort of redemption, a buying back, a rescue. And I think these are just like really rich moments. And I think part of why the anime, the manga, and then also the live action show really resonates with people is because it's a picture of these things that are possible. Like redemption is possible. It's possible to be an outcast, but to still find your people and to find belonging. It's possible to chase a dream that, in all likelihood, you probably won't reach it, but you can go along, and what you learn through the process can be greater than maybe the treasure that you're chasing. And I think all of these things are like little glimpses of grace. And I think it's why the show has such a huge following, because it reminds people of these different traces of goodness and surprise that are available to us in the world by God's mercy. And so I think I would just drop that for listeners, pay attention to what happens with the hat, and because that can be a really, really neat thing through this first season.
Yeah, it's such a great design choice also because if I saw you wearing it as you are right now, Claude, and didn't know anything about One Piece, I would not describe that as a pirate hat, right? I would think of other associations, and that's exactly what this whole series is trying to do is as Luffy is trying to redefine what it means to be a pirate, he's even doing it in what he wears. So love that touch. All right. Well, thank you both for walking me through this world, which has been a fascinating, and I think we've discovered a really rich one. How can listeners keep up with you guys? Are the two of you still partaking in the socials these days, or have you given up? Where are you at these days, Abby?
I'm kind of half and half. I'm on the platform formerly known as Twitter some of the time. I also am on Blue Sky pretty regularly and still on Instagram because I can't stop looking at pictures of cute cats. So those are those are places where I'm still active.
And that's as Abby Olcese, right?
Yes, at Abby Olcese on formerly known as Twitter and Blue Sky.
All right. How about you, Claude?
Yeah, I'm on formerly known as Twitter, still holding it down there. Instagram as well. You can check me out on Substack. Good Things is my newsletter that I write. Usually comes out once a month, maybe 2 if I'm disciplined and folks are lucky. But yeah, just look first and last name. You can keep in touch with me there, and yeah, and also make sure you're keeping in touch with the podcast and on the website because we've got lots of great stuff there.
Excellent. Well, thanks, Claude, for making sure that One Piece didn't slip by us here at Think Christian. Abby, thank you for coming along on this episode as well. We'll talk to you guys again down the road, all right?
Sounds good. Thanks.
Thank you.
If you're looking for more on One Piece, we did publish an article by Sarah Young-Ah White where she proposes the idea of straw hat Christians. Now, we somewhat touched on this, but Sarah digs more into how Luffy models ways of working alongside others who are from different or maybe even opposing backgrounds, and doing that all toward a shared vision. So you can read that article by Sarah over at thinkchristian.net. We do have space for comments on posts like that, so if you'd like to weigh in on One Piece there, go ahead and leave a comment on Sarah's article. You can also email us, tcpodcast@thinkchristian.net. Share your thoughts about One Piece, or if you have any comments about the podcast in general, we would love to hear those. Next up on the show, well, would you believe that TC has never given full attention to reservation dogs? It has come up, the Hulu series, in our Best of TV of the Year episode. We referenced it. I think a few people picked it as their favorite show of the year. But yeah, we've never done a dedicated post. We haven't had a podcast episode about it. So we're going to rectify that as season 2 of Reservation Dogs comes to a close. Next show, Roslyn Hernandez and J.R. Foresteros are going to join me. We'll be able to talk all things Reservation Dogs, including the finale of season 2. Also coming up is the next edition of the TC Movie Club. We'll be gathering online on Monday, October 23, to discuss horror. What is it good for? This is jumping off my new book, Fear Not, A Christian Appreciation of Horror Movies. So watch your favorite scary movie, then come join us. You can sign up to get a Zoom link via email at thinkchristian.net/movie club. Until then, if you want to keep up with the articles that we're publishing, the best way is to sign up to get our emails. thinkchristian.net/subscribe is where you can do that. The TC Podcast is a listener-supported production of Reframe Ministries, a family of programs designed to help you see your whole life reframed by God's gospel story. Visit reframeministries.org for more information. Our audio engineer and post-production supervisor is John Reeder, and Reframe's co-director overseeing content strategy is Robin Bassler. I'm Josh Larsen. Thank you so much for listening. We'll be back in a couple of weeks to consider how another corner of our pop culture fandom connects with our faith.